Hi there, my name is Vlad, and I am a backend engineer on the developer experience API team. Our team has recently been exploring optimizations and improvements that we can make to the REST API, including updating the documentation to OpenAPI 3 specs, like the ones that you see on the screen right now. We're looking at a couple of different solutions, so please check out the demo video that my colleague Max Wolf recently posted. It's would probably be good to watch in conjunction with this one as well. And so the proof of concept and the solution that I was exploring and building and that I'll be talking about in this video involves a Grape to Rswag conversion class. The Rswag gem. It's a Rails gem that's been around for a while. It's very well maintained. It's likely to be pretty well maintained in the future, and it does provide support for OpenAPI 3 plus spec generation. The way that the gem itself works is that it parses integration tests to generate the OpenAPI 3 specs. So what we need to do in order to be able to use this gem is to convert all of our um, Grape entity or our Grape endpoints to Rswag integration specs that are written with the Rswag DSL. The DSL itself it's fairly easy to understand. It'll look pretty familiar. Um, and I was able to leverage all of the built-in Grape DSL methods to be able to directly map to the RSwag DSL needed to create the specs. So why don't we just see how it works? So here I am in a Rails console. The class is just a Grape to Rswag. You pass the new instance, the name of an API class name. At this time, it only takes one, and there's an instance method called convert to spec. And what that does is it generates a spec into a predefined directory. Um, and what you get in the end is something that looks like this. Um, so it takes the endpoint, it groups all of the routes by path, and then lists and then generates specs based on those routes. It parses all of the parameters and, as you can see, converts it into the RSwag DSL here, including all of the metadata defined for those params, like whether it's required, whether it is an array, any enums associated with it, descriptions. It also distinguishes between query params for basic GET requests as well as URL params that are in the path. On top of that, for modifying requests like puts and patches and post requests, it is also able to generate the request body schema and all of the properties that need to be passed to it. Now, one of the reasons why we're hoping to update to OpenAPI 3 is to leverage a lot of the features like one of, which is something that OpenAPI 3 offers. In addition to all of the parameters that are passed to the request, it also um, translates the tags and all of the failure responses. The proof of concept that I built, I didn't include authorization and authentication in it. There were I think that there are probably uh, some nested entity responses that are also missing. So in addition to the params, it also generates a response schema with all of the properties that would be available on it. Um, and there was one other thing that I noticed that on occasion we dynamically generate things like default values, but I think that can be solved in the future when we refactor and kind of tweak it. So out of these tests, the tests are generated. You can check them. And then after that, the next step is there's a built-in rake task with the Rswag gem. Here I pass it the directory where all the specs are being generated into. You call this, and it runs all of the specs and parses them, and as a result generates that YAML file that you saw earlier. And in addition, this very robust and amazing documentation. It's pretty standard open API documentation that's interactive. Here's that environment's endpoint. You can see that it shows the required params with examples. There's an example of the request body, the response body, and all of the failure responses. You can interact with it. Over in the events endpoint, you can see if you try it out, there's a drop down with all of the enum values that you can choose from and what the what you're restricted to using for those different params or properties. Um, I think that there are a couple of really interesting points to note about potentially pursuing this solution. Um, the first is that if we were to start using Rswag, it would in turn benefit us by giving us the ability um, to have bidirectional development. Right now, the way the process works is you add or update an endpoint, you write your request specs, and then you generate your documentation. With the way that the Rswag development process works, you could, in theory, um, design an API endpoint, write the specs for it that would generate the documentation, and then the developer would develop against existing documentation, which is kind of cool and kind of a different approach that like might be useful in certain feature developments or situations. The other thing is that I think that we would be able to begin converting the API classes, checking them, generating the OpenAPI 3 documentation, and do that in parallel and not necessarily run the Rswag specs in production. But later, be able to kind of reuse that converter class. And if we decide to switch over to Rswag request spec kind of format, which I think would be a great idea, we would have this built-in developer tooling that if an engineer was working on modifying, updating, or adding a new API endpoint, um, instead of having to like manually make sure they're writing a request spec or that they did everything correctly, they could use this converter class to generate specs for that endpoint. And in that way, I think that it would kind of ensure consistency, um, and potentially flag any issues the um, with the endpoint that was added to begin with. I think that's it for now. Thank you so much. Please check out the issue, which has the linked MR in the description, to take this code for a ride yourself in your local development environment. Thanks so much for watching.